Sandra, I've been obviously following a lot of this and writing on it on my Substack. The biggest thing you've got to do as a former detective is you've got to narrow down that timeline. You've got to narrow down those constraints to the smallest possible window, because then you decrease exponentially the amount of data and things you have to do. And for me,
1:47 in the morning. Tucson, Arizona. A quiet residential neighborhood where the streets go silent long before midnight and the only sounds are crickets and the occasional car passing through. And then a camera goes dark. Not because of a power outage. Not because of a technical glitch. Because someone made it go dark. But here is what that someone did not know. Did not plan for. Could not have accounted for. Inside the chest of an 84-year-old woman sleeping in that house, a device no larger than a small matchbox had already started recording. Not video. Not audio. Something far more precise than either of those things. Her own heartbeat. Time-stamped. Logged. Stored in a cloud server that would still be running long after that camera went dark and long after that masked figure disappeared into the night. The FBI has been sitting with what that device recorded for over 3 months. And what it captured, what it logged between 1:47 and 2:28 in the morning of February 1st, 2026, is the kind of evidence that does not lie. Cannot be coached. Cannot be manipulated. Cannot be explained away. It is the most medically precise evidence in this entire investigation. And the results of the FBI's decoding effort are deeply disturbing. Not because of what they cannot figure out. Because of what they already know. Hi viewers. Here is a question, and it is a simple one. Before watching this video, had you ever heard of Nancy Guthrie? Yes or no? Drop it in the comments right now. Because that answer matters. It matters because Nancy Guthrie is not a headline. She is not a trending topic. She is a person. And the story of what happened to her on the night of February 1st, 2026 deserves more than a passing scroll. She is 84 years old. She is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, the longtime anchor of NBC's Today Show, one of the most recognized faces in American morning television. She is also the mother of Annie Guthrie, who lives in Tucson, who had dinner with her mother on the evening of January 31st, 2026, and whose husband Tommaso drove Nancy home afterward.
I want to know, at the time that the last time that the app successfully pinged, did it show, what kind of data does it show? Does it show that Nancy was functioning normally, her heart was normal, or does it show that she was an extremist? Was her heart elevated? That starts giving you a window when things started happening between the time the camera triggered and it gets in there.
Nancy Guthrie is not a public figure. She never sought attention. Never wanted a camera in her face or a microphone pointed in her direction. She was a woman who raised her children largely on her own. A woman who kept a garden. Who attended church on Sundays. Who spent quiet evenings on the porch of her home in the Catalina foothills neighborhood of Tucson, Arizona, a neighborhood of wide, calm streets and houses set back from the road, the kind of place where people leave their windows open at night because it feels safe. She had a pacemaker. A small implanted cardiac device that had been helping regulate her heart rhythm for years. One of those quiet medical facts about a person's life that most people outside her family would never even know. That pacemaker is now the most important piece of evidence in a federal investigation. Because on the night of February 1st, 2026, while every external camera went dark and every human witness was asleep, the device was wide awake. It recorded everything. And Nancy Guthrie has been missing for over 90 days. Think about that number for a moment. 90 days. 90 mornings without her garden. 90 Sundays without church. 90 nights that her porch has sat empty in the Catalina foothills while the streets stay quiet and the neighbors have no idea what happened behind that front door.
And then I did a quick analysis. I looked at the location and I did an egress analysis to say, if I wanted to get more than 5 miles away outside a 5-mile radius, how many major routes are those? And there are 5 major routes, dozens of ways inside each route, but there's 5 major routes. So abductors and criminals like this also are bound by human behavior, which is, you look at serial crimes, serial killers, geographic profiling, there's this thing called distance decay. You only go out so far before you run risk, right?
The FBI knows something happened. The pacemaker told them that much with absolute certainty. But what it recorded in those 41 minutes? The 41 minutes between the camera going dark and the last data sync at 2:28 in the morning is a sequence of physiological events so specific, so clinically precise, that forensic cardiologists who reviewed the data did not use vague language when they described what they found. They used the kind of language that ends up in federal case files. And it starts with a single moment. A single timestamp. The exact second that changed everything. 1:47 in the morning. A doorbell camera captures a masked figure approaching the property. All black clothing. Gloves. A slim, athletic build standing somewhere between 5 feet 10 and 6 feet 2. 2 bags. Moving with the kind of deliberate, unhurried purpose that does not belong to someone who stumbled onto a property by accident. At 1:47, that figure disabled the camera. The footage went dark. And at that exact same second, not a minute later, not 30 seconds later, the exact same second, Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker logged a sudden and dramatic spike in her heart rate. Her own heart confirmed what the camera captured in its final frames. She was awake. She was conscious. And something had just terrified her. That is where this story begins. Not with speculation. Not with theory. With a timestamp and a heartbeat that lined up so precisely that investigators knew immediately, this was not a coincidence. This was the beginning of something that had been planned. Carefully. Methodically. By someone who came prepared for everything except the one witness they could not see, could not disable, and could not silence. The device inside Nancy Guthrie's chest. And what that device recorded next is something that the FBI has spent more than 3 months carefully, painstakingly decoding. A 41-minute window of cardiac data that tells the story of that night better than any camera ever could. By the time this story is finished, the question will not be whether something terrible happened to Nancy Guthrie on the night of February 1st. The question will be who made it happen. And whether the FBI is already closer to that answer than anyone realizes. Here is what most people do not understand about a pacemaker. Most people think it is a regulator. A small device that sends electrical signals to keep a heart beating in rhythm. And it does that. That part is accurate. But that is only half of what modern implanted cardiac devices actually do. The other half is what made this case different from the moment the FBI subpoenaed the data. Modern pacemakers are recorders. Every single heartbeat logged. Every arrhythmia captured with a precise timestamp. Every spike above normal, every drop below normal, every significant physiological shift the body moves through, all of it stored. And beyond the cardiac data, many modern devices contain accelerometers. Sensors that detect physical movement. Sensors precise enough to distinguish between a person walking voluntarily under their own power and a person whose body is being moved by someone else. Nancy's pacemaker had all of it. It also had something else. A home monitoring base unit. A device plugged into the wall in her bedroom that transmitted her cardiac data to the manufacturer's secure cloud platform on a continuous basis. Not once a day. Continuously. Every significant event, synced and stored in real time. That cloud data is what the FBI subpoenaed in the first week of February 2026. The manufacturer complied immediately. And what the FBI's forensic cardiac specialists found inside that cloud record is what changes everything about this case. The full digital forensics log reads like a timeline that no one was supposed to survive intact. But it did survive. Every second of it. At 1:46 and 58 seconds in the morning, the front door sensor detected motion. For seconds later, at 1:47 and 2 seconds, the doorbell camera began recording. At 1:47 and 15 seconds, the masked figure appeared on camera. 3 seconds after that, at 1:47 and 18 seconds, the pacemaker logged a significant cardiac event. Heart rate spiking. Rhythm becoming irregular. At 1:47 and 20 seconds, an audio analysis tool flagged an unusual sound event from inside the residence. By 1:47 and 50 seconds, the suspect had left the camera frame. The camera was disabled. 41 minutes of silence followed. No camera. No phone signal.
There's also a risk factor involved in this, is that you're only going to drive so far and do so much before you run the risk of being stopped by law enforcement on a traffic stop, maybe have an accident, things like that. So there's a lot of things coming together, but the biggest thing you got to do is that house is a system. It's a closed system. Start from there, look at the iPhone, look at the watch, and bring all this stuff together, because then your analysis that you launch from that can be more targeted and more directed.
No external record of any kind. But the pacemaker recorded every second of those 41 minutes. And what it captured across for distinct phases is the kind of evidence that forensic cardiologists do not describe in casual terms. Phase 1. Nancy was awake. This is the first thing the data established with complete clinical certainty. The cardiac spike at 1:47 is not the pattern of a sleeping person startled from rest. A person pulled from deep sleep produces a different physiological response, gradual, disoriented, slow to peak. What the pacemaker logged at 1:47 and 18 seconds was acute, sudden. A sharp vertical line on the cardiac record that corresponds to one specific human experience. Conscious terror. She was not asleep when this began. She was awake. She was aware. And at the precise moment that masked figure disabled her doorbell camera, her own heart confirmed she knew something was deeply wrong. That detail matters more than it might seem on the surface, because it means Nancy Guthrie experienced the beginning of that night fully conscious. Her heart could not lie about that. Her heart did not lie about that. But then the data moves into phase 2. And this is where the picture darkens. In a normal startle response, a loud noise, an unexpected sound, the heart rate spikes and returns to baseline within a few minutes. The body self-regulates. The nervous system recalibrates. That is what a safe resolution looks like on a cardiac record. That is not what happened here. Nancy's heart rate did not come back down. It stayed elevated. The rhythm showed the kind of irregularities that forensic cardiologists associate with prolonged emotional distress. Not a medical emergency in the clinical sense. But not calm. Not safe. Not a woman who heard something, checked her house, found nothing, and went back to bed. The sustained elevation tells one story with no room for alternate interpretation. Whatever triggered that spike at 1:47 did not leave. It stayed. It remained present in that house. And Nancy's body stayed in a sustained state of acute fear for an extended period that followed. Then phase 3 arrived. And the accelerometer data changed everything. Approximately 15 to 20 minutes into that 41-minute window, the movement signature in the pacemaker data shifted. And this is the finding that investigators have been most deliberate about discussing, because the clinical language around it is precise in a way that leaves very little room for alternate explanation. When a person walks, moves under their own power, navigates a hallway or a room, the accelerometer records a specific pattern. Rhythmic. Self-directed. The signature of voluntary movement. What the accelerometer recorded in phase 3 was different. The movement was passive. Not self-generated. The rhythm of it, the sustained character of it, the way it registered against the cardiac data happening simultaneously, it matched one scenario more than any other. A body being moved by someone else. Being carried. Being transported. And the duration and character of that movement was consistent with something that the FBI's forensic team did not describe loosely. Being placed in a vehicle. And driven away. The camera was gone. The home monitoring signal was still active at this point. But Nancy was no longer inside her house. Her body was moving through the night in a direction that the accelerometer could record but could not name. And then came phase 4.
It was at 2:12 a.m. that the software detected a person on camera. That's sort of vague because we know she didn't pay for a subscription. The police said there's no video available. So whatever it is that the camera does, it somehow identified movement on the camera and identified that as a person and shot that over as an update coming from the camera.
This is the part that the FBI's forensic cardiac team described as the most clinically significant finding in the entire analysis. And it is the part that stays with anyone who reads the case file carefully. In the final 10 to 15 minutes before the sync stopped at 2:28, the heart rate data began to change in a very specific way. Not dramatically. Not suddenly. Gradually. In a pattern that cardiologists recognize because it appears in clinical settings, in controlled medical environments, when a patient is being administered a sedative compound. Heart rate variability. The natural beat-to-beat variation that a conscious, aware person's heart maintains as the nervous system continuously regulates cardiac function. That variability began to decrease. Significantly. In a pattern consistent with one clinical explanation. Pharmacological sedation. A substance administered to an 84-year-old woman in the back of a vehicle on a dark highway outside Tucson, Arizona, in the early hours of February 1, 2026. Someone came to that house with a sedative already in their possession. That is not an accident. That is not improvisation. That is planning. That is preparation. That is someone who knew exactly what they were going to do when they got inside, and who had already acquired the means to do it before they ever set foot on that property. And that single finding, that cardiac signature in the final minutes before the sync dropped, narrowed the entire investigative profile of whoever did this in ways that the FBI is still actively pursuing. Medical-grade sedating compounds that produce that type of rapid-onset cardiac signature are not available over a pharmacy counter. They require a procurement trail, a prescription history, a clinical connection, or a supply chain that itself leaves a trace. The specific signature visible in the pacemaker data narrows the range of compounds that could have produced it. Narrowing the compound narrows the list of people who could have obtained it. The FBI is following that trail right now. At 2:28 in the morning, the sync between Nancy's pacemaker and her home monitoring unit stopped. And for weeks after that, this timestamp was misreported in ways that damaged public understanding of what the evidence actually showed. Multiple outlets reported that Nancy's pacemaker stopped at 2:28. That her heart stopped. That is not what happened. The sync stopped. The wireless connection between the device in her chest and the base unit in her bedroom was broken either because the vehicle had traveled far enough from her home that the signal could no longer bridge the distance, or because someone had disabled the base unit directly. The pacemaker itself did not stop. At 2:28 in the morning of February 1, 2026, Nancy Guthrie's heart was beating. Sedated. Altered. But beating. She was alive. Now here is where the physical evidence outside the pacemaker begins to build a second layer around everything that device recorded. The masked figure caught on that doorbell camera in the final seconds before it went dark, slim build, athletic, dressed entirely in black, gloves on both hands, carrying 2 bags. 2 bags. That detail matters more than it sounds. One bag might be personal, incidental. 2 bags, in that context, at that hour, suggest preparation. Compartmentalization. Someone who had organized what they needed before they arrived and brought it with them in a form they could carry quickly. This figure became known in the investigation as Porch Guy. And on May 6, 2026, a CW special titled The Nancy Guthrie Mystery brought 3 of the most credentialed criminal investigation experts in the country together on camera to analyze the case. Dr. Ann Burgess, the criminal profiler whose decades of work with the FBI directly inspired the Netflix series Mindhunter. Dr. Gary Brucato, forensic psychologist at Boston College and co-author of landmark research on targeted violence. Dr. Casey Jordan, criminologist and behavioral analyst with years of network television and federal case consulting behind her.
It was then at 2:28 a.m. that the Pacemaker app, which obviously this tells us they got a hold of the app. The app showed disconnect from the phone. Says 2:28 a.m. That means she could be down the driveway. We just don't know. But to John's point about the Bluetooth reaching about 100 feet, we know the phone was left behind and the pacemaker could have been about that distance away when it disconnected.
All three of them said the same thing. Porch Guy may already be gone, eliminated by the person who sent him there in the first place. The person they referred to simply as the boss. Think about what that means when placed against the pacemaker data. Porch Guy came in through the front, disabled the camera, entered the home, was present during those 41 minutes. But he was not the architect of this. Someone else planned the timing. Someone else knew the layout of the camera system. Someone else obtained the sedative and ensured it was on that property before sunrise. Someone else had a vehicle positioned and ready. Porch Guy was the visible piece. The boss was the invisible one. And if the boss has already removed Porch Guy from the picture to prevent identification, that tells investigators something critical about the psychological profile they are dealing with. This is not someone acting on emotion. Not someone spiraling. This is someone making calculated, deliberate decisions to manage their exposure even after the fact. The kind of person who plans for contingencies before they arise. Which brings the investigation to the DNA. Inside Nancy's home, investigators recovered a rootless hair sample and biological material from a bed sheet. Rootless hair is notoriously resistant to traditional DNA analysis. Without the follicle attached, the standard extraction methods produce incomplete or unusable profiles the majority of the time. But the FBI did not send this evidence to a standard lab. It went to Quantico. And the Bureau partnered with Astria Forensics, a California-based laboratory that specializes in low copy number DNA and touch DNA analysis, the kind of work that extracts usable genetic information from samples that most labs would send back as inconclusive. Paired with that partnership is a name that carries enormous weight in forensic investigation circles. CECE Moore. Forensic genealogist. One of the most respected practitioners of genetic genealogy in the country. A specialist who has cracked cases that sat cold for decades using nothing more than degraded biological material and public genealogy databases. Her methodology does not require a perfect DNA sample. It does not require a name already in law enforcement records. It requires a partial profile and the patients to trace biological connections through family trees until a suspect emerges from the data. She has done it before. Repeatedly. In cases that had no other viable path forward. If the hair sample from Nancy's home produces even a partial genetic profile, and if that profile connects to anyone in a publicly accessible genealogy database, investigators may not need to already know who the boss is. They can build toward that name one family branch at a time. But while that analysis moves forward at Quantico, something else was happening. 2 notes arrived at TMZ. Same sender. Same morning. The first note claimed Nancy was dead. The second note, sent hours later from the same person, claimed she had been seen alive in Sonora, Mexico. 2 notes. 1 sender. 1 morning. Completely contradicting each other. Retired FBI agents who reviewed the notes publicly called them fraudulent almost immediately. The contradictions were too obvious. The details too vague. The internal logic collapsed the moment both notes were placed side by side. But here is the detail that makes those notes not just fraudulent but revealing in a different way entirely. The pacemaker data at 2:28 does not show cardiac arrest. It does not show the device entering a postmortem non-pacing mode. It does not show the physiological signature of a heart that has stopped. It shows a sedated, functioning heart. A living person's cardiac pattern at the last recorded moment before the sync dropped. Whoever wrote that first note claiming Nancy was dead, they did not have access to the FBI's decoded pacemaker data. They were not working from knowledge of what the device actually recorded. They were guessing. And their guess was clinically, medically, precisely wrong. Which means one of 2 things.
But if they got the reading on the pacemaker through the app, what other readings did they see prior to that? That's a great question, but that's a 41-minute window. What was happening inside the house? They've had full access to that house. We saw the blood on the doorstep. Well, there's been no details provided to the public over what they found when they got inside. What did the bed look like? What did it look like? There was signs of struggle. We don't have any detail from inside the home.
Either the note sender genuinely believed she was dead but had no actual knowledge of her condition, or they were attempting to redirect investigators, to introduce doubt, to shift focus away from the possibility that she was still alive and still findable. Neither explanation is comforting. And while the fraudulent notes were being analyzed and dismissed, a jurisdictional conflict between the agencies working this case had already cost the investigation something it could not get back: time. Early in the investigation, the Pima County Sheriff's Office sent a DNA sample to a laboratory in Florida. Not Quantico. Not the FBI's specialized forensic units. A state-level facility in Florida. When a reporter asked the Pima County Sheriff directly about the DNA routing on live television, he confirmed it went to Florida. The FBI had already stated publicly that the evidence went to Quantico. Two agencies. Two different answers. One piece of evidence. One missing woman. That contradiction played out publicly. It raised questions about the coordination between local and federal investigators that still have not been fully answered. Jurisdictional friction in high-profile federal cases is not unusual. Both agencies carry institutional priorities. Both operate within their own procedural frameworks. But in a case where an 84-year-old woman's location is unknown and every day of delay compounds the difficulty of finding her, that kind of miscommunication is more than an administrative error. It is time that Nancy did not have. Other mistakes compounded the problem. Details about the FBI's Bluetooth detection sweep, the deployment of signal-sniffing equipment designed to detect the specific wireless signal emitted by Nancy's pacemaker, were disclosed publicly on multiple occasions. The pacemaker broadcasts a low-power Bluetooth signal when near a compatible monitoring unit or clinical programmer. The detection range is short, 15 to 30 feet under ideal conditions, which means the sweep required investigators to be in the right geographic area, close enough to Nancy's physical location, to register the signal at all. When those sweep parameters became public knowledge, anyone with even basic technical awareness of how Bluetooth cardiac monitoring works would understand exactly what precaution to take. Keep Nancy away from any medical device, any monitoring unit, any clinical setting where a programmer might be within range of her chest. The disclosure did not end the sweep, but it narrowed the operational advantage the FBI had held quietly. The initial geographic search also moved too slowly in the critical first 48 hours. The focus stayed near Nancy's home. The accelerometer data from the pacemaker, the data that suggested vehicle transport and a radius of 12 to 25 miles in the direction of travel, was not fully decoded and operationalized quickly enough to drive the early search parameters. That 12 to 25 mile radius. It is not an arbitrary number. 15 to 20 minutes of highway travel south of Tucson. That is what the accelerometer data, the vehicle movement signature, the duration and rhythm of passive transport all pointed toward. When that radius is overlaid on a map, the highway corridor heading south toward Rio Rico, toward the Mexican border, falls directly inside it. Investigators know this. The Bluetooth detection sweeps have been concentrated in this zone. The geographic logic of the pacemaker data points south. And that is where the FBI's resources are focused right now. Here is the honest truth about where this investigation stands. The pacemaker data established what happened to Nancy Guthrie between 1:47 and 2:28 in the morning of February 1, 2026. It cannot say where she is today. The internal device logs, everything recorded after the sync dropped at 2:28, every hour of every day across 90-plus days, are still stored inside the device implanted in her chest. Inaccessible until she is found. The pacemaker has no GPS. Its Bluetooth signal was not designed for long-distance tracking. The cloud record ended when the sync dropped. But what the cloud record showed before it ended carries its own certainty.
There's some detail outside the home that could actually inform a little bit more of the decision making, and that's where you get to the blood spatter experts. So anytime you have blood, and I'm not an expert in this, but work with people who are, you look at things like impact. You can tell from blood spatter if it's impact. You can tell if it's cast off or if it's just dropping. So the other thing that would let you know about the blood is, was that from an assault? Did she trip and fall? Which she's scared. So a lot of data that's going to help solve this case.
Nancy Guthrie was alive at 2:28 in the morning. Her heart was beating. Her pacemaker was functioning. The sedation pattern in those final minutes is the pattern of a living person. Not cardiac arrest. Not the physiological signature that follows when a heart stops permanently. A living person. Still out there. Somewhere in a radius that narrows with every piece of data the FBI processes. FBI Director Kash Patel used a specific word when discussing this investigation publicly. He used the word nefarious. He said that if investigators find nefarious conduct or conspiracy, they will make the appropriate arrests. Federal directors do not reach for that word carelessly. They do not deploy it in press appearances unless the evidence already before them justifies it. The pacemaker data gave the FBI a timeline precise enough to reconstruct 41 minutes of a night that was designed to leave no trace. The DNA at Quantico, processed through probabilistic genotyping and the forensic genealogy methodology of CECE Moore and Astria Forensics, may give them something the pacemaker never could. A name. The procurement trail for the sedating compound identified in the cardiac signature is an active investigative thread. The specific physiological pattern narrows the compound. The compound narrows the supply chain. The supply chain narrows the list of people who could have obtained it and brought it to a quiet residential neighborhood in the Catalina foothills at 1:47 in the morning. And the identity of the boss, the person who planned this, who coordinated the timing, who sourced the sedative, who had a vehicle ready, who may have already made Porch Guy disappear to protect their own exposure, remains the central target of the entire federal investigation. Somewhere in Tucson, an empty bedroom holds a monitoring base unit plugged into a wall. It is still powered. Still waiting. Still configured to receive the signal from a pacemaker it has not heard from since 2:28 in the morning of February 1st, 2026. That device inside Nancy's chest has been running every single day since she disappeared. Every hour. Every minute. Logging. Timestamping. Recording everything she has experienced. Every moment of fear. Every moment of stillness. The complete physiological truth of 90+ days that the rest of the world has spent searching, speculating, and waiting. All of it stored. All of it intact. All of it waiting inside a device the size of a small matchbox, inside an 84-year-old woman who tended her garden and attended church and had dinner with her daughter on the last ordinary evening of her life. She deserves to be home. And the next development in this investigation, the one that investigators have been building toward quietly while the public focused on the fraudulent notes and the jurisdictional disputes and the contradicting headlines, is closer than most people covering this case have acknowledged. The DNA results from Quantico are being processed right now. CECE Moore and Astria Forensics do not return inconclusive findings quietly. When they find something, it moves. When a genetic profile connects to a family tree in a public database, the trail from that connection to an actual identity can collapse faster than anyone outside forensic genealogy circles expects. And when that result lands, if it lands the way it has landed in cases CECE Moore has worked before, this story is going to shift in a direction that makes everything covered here suddenly sharpen into focus. There is a name attached to this crime. There is a person who planned it, funded it, executed it, and has been living with the knowledge of what they did every day for 90+ days. The FBI believes that. The pacemaker data supports that. And the procurement trail, the DNA, and the genealogy analysis are all pointed at the same destination. The next video on this case is going to cover something that has not been fully reported anywhere. A specific detail from the investigation's timeline. Something that happened in the weeks after February 1st that the agencies involved have kept deliberately quiet. A detail that, when placed against the pacemaker data and the DNA findings, points directly at the profile of the boss in a way that narrows this case to a very small number of people. If this case matters to you, and after everything covered in this video, it should make sure the next video finds you before it finds everyone else.